Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to welcome a very special guest today, Kunle Apampa. He is the director and head of client advisory and partnerships at Capricorn. He joined the firm in 2021. Prior to Capricorn, Kunle formed and led the strategic partnerships and portfolio solutions team at Goldman Sachs Imprint, an ESG and impact investment unit within the Alternative Investments and Manager Selection AIMS group. Kunle spent over a decade at Goldman Sachs, holding several leadership roles within the firm's global markets division as well as the finance division. Kunle holds a BSc in chemical engineering, specializing in energy, environment, and economics from the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. Super excited to welcome him. Welcome to SheVC. I'm your founder and host, Gayatri Sarkar. Super excited to welcome you, Kunle Apampa, to SheVC podcast, and we are so honored to have you. And so let me start with the very first question. I worked at Goldman Sachs during the recession period. You spent over a decade at Goldman Sachs, though in different time, and now you recently joined as a director at one of the largest mission-aligned investment firm globally, Capricorn Investment Group. Would love to know how do mid-career talent allocators, specifically someone like you, navigate such career move? I know I'm asking the very first question about career.
Yeah, not at all. And I'm really honored to be here having this discussion with you and more broadly shedding light about my career, how I got to where I am right now. But to partly answer your question, truthfully, I believe it's part luck, but also part self-reflection. I spent 10 and a half years at Goldman, as you mentioned. And in my last role, I sat in our ESG and impact investing unit within the Alternative Investments and Manager Selection group within the broader asset management division. And it was a tremendous experience for me to learn from the likes of Taylor Jordan, who was one of the co-founders of Imprint back in 2008. And Goldman acquired Imprint in 2015 as part of their doubling down effort towards sustainable finance. There's a $750 billion commitment by Goldman out there to allocate that capital towards sustainable finance. And having that as a mandate, welcomed Imprint into the broader organization. And I spent about a year and a half on the platform, working specifically with investors and a broad range of them, from corporate and religious institutions to nonprofits, to high net worth individuals, family offices, foundations, and the like. It was a tremendous experience, sort of taking what we do best, which is third-party fund investing diligence, creating a menu of these opportunities that were mission aligned and impact driven, and being able to create on the other end for these investors custom separately managed account and fund of one structures that were all mission aligned towards their mandate and their objectives and long-term goals. That's to preface a little bit of what I did, but before I even got into that seat, I had a moment where I reflected on my career on what are you even doing? And are you really fulfilled with what you are doing in your day-to-day job? I think there are a lot of people who look like me that hit that ceiling when they go into corporate America and have goals and ambitions to really make something out of their life. And for me, I created a doomsday scenario. I'm originally from Lagos, Nigeria, so I'm an immigrant. Working for Goldman as a big institution, my doomsday scenario was, what if I got fired and I was deported back home? What are those skill sets that I can take back home to someone who has capital and say, I can build you this from a blank Excel or Word doc? And that was when I had my sort of aha moment to really force myself to dig deeper and try to understand what I'm trying to accomplish for myself. Through that process, I came up with 6 to 7 things that were really important to me as skill sets that I wanted to build. And then I funneled every job after that through that lens. And if it didn't tick 6 of the 7, then I wasn't really interested in that job. Impact investing and ESG investing was a perfect fit for me. I have a chemical engineering degree and I specialized in energy, environment, and economics. So I had a passion for sustainability within the engineering practice. When I started my career at Goldman, that took a little bit of a detour, learning more about the financial industry. But I got to this moment where I found an intersectionality between what I really loved to do back in college and now this wonderful, robust, experience that I had at Goldman working in the financial markets. And it was just a perfect mesh of both. And that for me was very instrumental to be able to pivot my career a little bit because I was able to leverage skill sets not only from the financial angle, but also from the technical angle and being able to understand things from my engineering days, talking about greenhouse gases and CO2 emissions. Those were things and projects that I worked on while I was in college as well. And so it was very fulfilling for me to recognize that and be able to use it and dig deeper to determine what I really wanted to do with my life. And that's what led me eventually to the seat that I am in at Capricorn. My role here as Director of Client Advisory and Partnership is really to build out a business where we can use the engine that Capricorn has built over the years and help other family offices and foundations apply those same investment philosophies to add complexities to the portfolio, but also give them access and networks that Capricorn has built over the last 20 years as well.
That's amazing. I mean, as an immigrant, I can totally understand because when I came to this country and working at the corporate, I was always looking for, what if I'm getting fired? What's the thing that I need to build where, I can be the go-to person for something that is a skill set, which is pretty much unmatched. And that is so important. And it's like, I'm such a big fan of your work. You are creating such amazing opportunities. You're a catalyst for change. And as we are seeing more people are bringing movement into the financial industry, how do you see biases and prejudices that played in the past come into effect for people like you?
It's a very good question that you ask because, different people have different lived experiences and different paths of how they get to where they got to. I think oftentimes people assume that because you are here now, you must have taken the path of less resistance. And it's actually contrary to the fact, right? Because I'm here now, a lot of people don't understand that journey that brought me here and a lot of the lessons that I learned along the way to be able to be the person that I am today, or be able to bring the skill sets that I bring from a professional standpoint as well. And so I think part of it too is educating, but also part of it too is allowing grace and opportunity to be able to tell folks the story. People who are really interested in you will ask you about your story. And that's always a great opportunity to share with them how you got to where you are so that they do have appreciated perspective on the journey and not just assume that because you're in this space now, some connection got you here or you took a path that most people out there are not opportune to as well. As an immigrant, and the obstacles are stacked when you come here. Just the paperwork alone to get here was so daunting. And then talk less of opportunities that I know in my career that I was eligible for, but I just couldn't get because from an eligibility standpoint on work authorization, I hadn't reached the level that they needed to be able to take me on. And so that gets you creative, that gets you entrepreneurial. I read a report a few weeks ago that was talking about sort of the top unicorns in America being started by immigrants.
Yeah.
And that the fact that they made their way from their home countries to the US in itself is entrepreneurial in nature. And that's why most immigrants are able to build businesses, because they understand what it is to persevere through adversity. And that's not to say that most people don't have that as well, but I'm giving more of a context on sort of the immigrant journey and being able to be entrepreneurial. So to answer your question in terms of how the biases play, a lot of it is being open to sharing that story. When I'm really big on each one, teach one. And because I'm here now, I also want to help other people that I see and identify as having the opportunity and the skill sets, but not necessarily the network and the access to be able to get there, helping them navigate through those things the way I was able to navigate through them as well.
No, I totally agree with you. And I think it ties to my next question is that, you know, private asset class, venture capital, private equity, finance industry as a whole is a very relationship driven industry and highly transactional. And you know, Capricorn has helped so many companies to be highly mission aligned and successfully ROI driven. I would love to know your perspective, and specifically, I know I'm a little bit going off the questions, but I would love to know, how do you navigate all those companies, specifically now you're focusing on ESG and climate. I would love to know your thought process of how Capricorn is working in building that space.
You know, I would love to preface the conversation with, the team has done an amazing job prior to me joining them only as of last year to get to where they are currently. And a lot of work, time, effort, reiteration of processes they have refined to get to where they are today. I think you're right in terms of the relationships that needs to be built within this industry to be able to make moves, quote unquote. But I think Capricorn was born with the ethos of mission alignment. And so it isn't hard for us to identify another entity that is mission aligned. When you have objectives, when you have conviction on what you're going to do, I don't think it's very difficult to find other people who you resonate with that are also aligned with those same set of values. And I think just from being here and listening to the folks who have done this at Capricorn for over 15 years, there's an element of it that is organic, right? It wasn't forced. It's not like they went to a conference and that's how they found a deal, or they were in a particular sort of syndicate group and that's how that came about. The partners here have been in this space for such a long time that they've built organic relationships over time. And they're easily able to identify companies that align with that mindset as well. And so I think the firm has done a tremendous job to be able to understand how much leverage they have, but also how organic the network is to be able to tap into it, that working with companies or working with funds make it easier to do because of that already established organic relationship.
Yeah, that's so true. And you know, one of the thing about this entire movement is like representation matters. And I think the financial industry has realized that, and they are now taking active measures and steps to improve the lack of representation, specifically after Black Lives Matter movement. But I would love to know from your experience, like, where do you think is the systemic problem? Because this is going on for a very long period of time. And when it comes to funding, specifically underrepresented fund managers or founders, what needs to be done systematically in order to change this? And I would love to know Capricorn's viewpoint, your personal viewpoint, but also Capricorn's viewpoint about diversity in Capricorn's fund and portfolios that you guys are investing.
The question you ask is a question where I answer it more of progress has been made, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah.
I think everyone is actually trying.
Yeah.
Like deep down inside, I truly believe a lot of people are actually trying and making efforts. I think what the problem is the connectivity to be able to identify opportunities early on are still not there. Take, for instance, Harlem Capital, one of the largest Black-owned funds that I know personally, very active. There's still some people that I talk to that don't know Harlem Capital. It's not because they don't want to know Harlem Capital, but sort of their ecosystem hasn't introduced them to Harlem Capital. And so the fragmentation between sort of knowing and not knowing, in my opinion, is what drives a little bit more of sort of this not being able to fund, diverse fund, or help underrepresented founders holistically. I think the pandemic helped in a way to add a little bit of tailwind into let's take a step back and actually try to figure out why. And as the years came out of the pandemic, it's only been 2-3 years, there's a realization of that fragmentation and the ability to bring it back together so folks can share information that actually makes sense. Now, that's my personal view. From a Capricorn perspective, within our ecosystem of the Jeff Skoll Group exists the Skoll Foundation. And the Skoll Foundation has made tremendous progress in that regard, in terms of being able to provide capital, but also resources for underrepresented entities, founders, funders, and alike. And it goes beyond just the US. There are people in Africa that recognize the Skoll Foundation and some of the awards that they give as critical validation for the work that they're doing. And so I think Capricorn has sort of the right mentality in terms of leveraging the ecosystem around us to be able to advance a lot of these work that we're doing. It doesn't have to be one person or one entity doing that work, but collaboration and a consortium of people to be able to get that movement going. And so I think over time, as we start to see more of the Harlem Capitals, both in the Black or Latinx communities emerge, it's going to be instrumental over time to make those defragmentations come back together, work together collaboratively, but also provide that awareness and continue to push on allocating capital towards diverse founders. Another thing I want to make sure that I'm really clear on is this idea of a carve out for diverse founders, right? You laugh because I'm sure you've probably faced a lot of this, in the work that you're doing as well. I think it's a good start, but I think a lot of this capital needs to be part of the main fund. And as we start to see folks like Harlem Capital have further iterations of their funds, they're going to move away from emerging managers to established managers. And that alone excites me at the prospect of how much influence they're going to have as established managers in being able to help and build other up and coming emerging managers to be able to get to where they are. I think this is just the beginning, and I'm really excited about what the future holds eventually.
No, that's amazing. And let's shift the gear more towards now, what you're doing in ESG and impact investing. And for a long time, impact investing has been equated to ESG. And ESG is more like the framework development and others. I would love to know from your standpoint, the work that you're doing in this space, and also what does the future looks like down the road, specifically in a mainstream financial industry?
I think the future is bright. And I say that from the perspective of what I'm seeing and how I'm seeing capital flow. there aren't many people that you talk to nowadays that don't understand or at least have an idea of what ESG and impact investing hopes to solve for. Now,
Right.
people may have different definitions on how they define it, but I think everyone can agree that the outcome is well understood. And so the way I view the world of ESG and impact investing and the future of it is that it would only continue once folks start to realize these measurable outcomes on people and planet. But not only being able to identify the metric, as the years go by, being able to see the trajectory, whether that be a plus or a minus, to show true impact. I think historically, a lot of investments that are made, we talk about the impact, but we never really measure the impact.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite sayings is, you can't improve what you don't measure. And so now that we are measuring that impact, I only see a further improvement in the framework of ESG and impact investing. A second part to that question that I think is important to me, and that I would also like the industry to speed up on, is sort of the standardization of the language and the way we approach ESG and impact investing. I think a little bit of it right now is a little bit of Wild West, where folks have their definition on one end, and then some other folks have a different lens of how they look about impact. And you can talk to impact investors across the board, and they will give you different perspective of what impact really means to them.
Right.
Some people view it in the lens of environmental, others view it in the lens of social. And even within those groups, there are even subgroups that have different viewpoints as well. None of them are wrong, but I think we need to get to a place where we're able to speak the same language. An example is the UN SDG goals as a goalpost.
Yeah.
When you say that, people know what you're talking about, and they can identify from 1 to 17 what those different parts hit on and what the outcomes are supposed to be. As an industry, we need to get to that place where when I say something to you, you understand the basis of where I'm coming from, and there's no misinterpretation of what I'm saying.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I feel like this is something which has been a struggling effort, because impact has always been an extension of nonprofit. And now this is now becoming more and more mainstream. I would love to know from your standpoint, from Capricorn standpoint also, when you're looking at so many, fund opportunities, direct opportunities, or even various asset class and strategies, how do you look to position Capricorn in those ESG and impact driven methods? I know I'm going a little bit off the questionnaire, but I would love to know that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's when I get this question, I pause a little bit, because I want to be able to communicate to folks that impact has always been core to Capricorn's investment philosophy, right?
Right.
We've managed multi-asset class portfolios and made investment decisions through a financial lens with environmental and social impact as measurable outcomes. That's it. And we've strived to embed impact within our DNA of our portfolio. We have 5 funds that are out there right now, 2 focused deep tech venture, 2 on the growth side, still within deep tech, and 1 seeding platform. And if you take a look at what we've done in these portfolios, I think it'll be very clear and very apparent to back up what I just mentioned in terms of impact being core to our philosophy. This is a group that has backed names like SpaceX, Tesla, Joby Helicopter, and then more recently things like 12, Halio, and other deep tech opportunities that are out there. I think what excites me is that we continue to see an inbound and an inflow of a lot of these cutting edge technology that may not be very relevant right now, but in 5 to 10 to 15 years from now will become very relevant. The same way that Capricorn saw Tesla, Planet Lab, QuantumScape, Sail Drone 15, 12, 10 years ago, and we're making investments in these opportunities, is the same way that we still have that same conviction to be able to identify opportunities that will become relevant and instrumental towards people on planet eventually.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm going to shift a gear a little bit now from your and focus more on your personal endeavor. You are an angel investor, and I'm so much in awe of what you're doing, because you are one of the most hardworking person I know. You
Thank
have
you.
so much of things going on, and I love your focus towards Africa. So coming back to angel investing, I totally agree that not every investor is a right fit for a founder. And I would love to know, and can you discuss a little bit more about some of the companies that you have backed, and how you do analyze those founders and their products that they're developing?
Yes, my day job gives me plenty to work on, especially because I've been given an opportunity to build something that existed informally, but now we want to add structure at Capricorn to scale, but also to be able to help folks who either lack the resource to or want to add complexity to their mandate. But nights and weekends, or I can consider it a hobby, I'm really impressed with what is actually coming out of Africa. And a huge portion of that is the pandemic in itself reshaping the narrative of what we need to do on ground.
Yeah.
I went back home last December for a few days, very short trip, even though it takes me about 10 hours to fly there one way. I only spent 5 days. But I met with over 40 founders and funders on ground. And I think what was truly amazing to me was the hustle, the grit, but more so the ability to execute.
Right.
I think over time in the past, there have been opportunities when Africa was the thing people wanted to do, and then it died down. And then a little more hype, and then it died down. I do have conviction that this probably won't die down for a little while because of how the future of work has been reshaped. A lot of folks work remotely now. And I think folks on ground and on the continent have redefined what it means to work for global institutions remotely from the continent. They've also built a pipeline of workforce, mainly with engineers, through firms like Andela and Flutterwave, who are then now spinning out of their day jobs to be entrepreneurs. And they're not just being entrepreneurs because their friends are doing it. They're actually identifying problems that are on ground that need fixing. And rather than wait for the government to fix very fundamental core infrastructure issues, they're using technology and the internet and access to the broader globe to be able to build companies that just make sense. One example is flaring. And I love flaring. I am actually a user of flaring. Flurry has taken the concept of remittance and extracted the value out of it and built a business on it. So rather than me send money home when someone asks me, hey, I need to pay for a medical bill, I can purchase an insurance policy here be the holder, and the beneficiaries be my loved ones back home.
Wow, that's powerful. That's hugely, hugely powerful.
Sam has done an amazing job building a network of hospitals, pharmacies, insurance companies, healthcare providers to be able to service almost anyone in Nigeria and Ghana. My parents live on the outskirts of the capital of Abuja in a almost remote location close to another state called Nasarawa. And when I signed them up for this, they're a little hesitant at first, like who's coming to my house and why. But obviously they trust their son. And after the whole process of getting a nurse out there, doing a full medical checkup, their confidence shot up through the roof. And I got an WhatsApp message from them saying, wow, what you guys are building is phenomenal. There's always a stereotype of sort of wanting to go to the hospital in Nigeria and hesitating because it can take you almost 4 to 5 hours before you can actually see a doctor.
Wow.
The system and the structure is not just built very efficiently to be able to facilitate volume that comes through these institutions. And so having a nurse that goes once a month at the comfort of my parents' time and leisure to do a medical checkup on them and make a recommendation on whether or not they need to go to the hospital is changing the narrative of how much they need to take care of their health. Now my mom's talking to me about more wearable gear so she can track calories.
Wow.
And be able to work better on her health, but also more so for them because they take evening walks. I think this has encouraged them to try to identify issues early on. But also, one thing I didn't mention is as part of Fleury, there's a WhatsApp group that includes my parents, myself, and a healthcare representative that is on call for anything they need.
Wow.
So if they go on there and say, I'm having this issue, I need someone, blah, 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 that healthcare representative is going to try their best to find a solution for them. For a long time, this has not happened, and this sort of attention to healthcare has not been there. And having a company like Fleury to fill in that gap, especially for folks like me in the diaspora that worry about my parents back home, I have more comfort knowing that my parents' health is in good hands with Fleury.
Wow. I mean, we don't have this even in US also, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And I think the thing with Africa is that it's, I still wonder what folks make me want to explain when I talk about Africa. The continent is behind when you compare them to most developed countries. And as such, the issues that they have, at least from my own lens, look like pretty low-hanging fruits to be solved for. They've been solved in the US, they've been advanced in most developed countries, they've been reiterated to a level that is beyond what we're even facing on ground right now. I think in Africa, we're still facing sort of a core problem that still needs to be fixed. And I'm excited about the young founders that are out there trying to redefine investment opportunities in Africa, but leveraging technology to be able to do so. Another company that I do want to mention very quickly is an ag tech company called Farms to You. And Farms to You uses data to help farmers farm better. It's a conduit platform where you have the money guys on one side, so microfinancing institution, any warehouse lending structure or facility, powering sort of where the capital comes from. But on the other side, you have the farmers who are looking to farm things like rice, beans, maize, cassava, staple goods. And rather than give them the money to do so, all of that sits in the platform.
Wow.
And so the farmer comes there to find resources on how can I farm rice better? Who can I actually buy seeds from for other crops? And how do I get the money to be able to do so? All of that is being done on the platform. So they never really need to leave the platform aside from just going outside and actually farming themselves. And that concept is reassuring investors that there is some sort of control on how that money is being spent, but also where it's going. And so having the vendors on the platform, having the warehouse and the MFIs on the platform helps with confidence to be able to execute on those types of strategies, but also helps the farmers educate themselves on regenerative agricultural practices. And as we know, the population of Africa is going to grow tremendously by 2050. But the size of land and the scalability of farming hasn't changed for a very long time. How do we catch up with the growth? And Farms to You is trying to solve that problem by empowering small holding farmers to be able to use regenerative agricultural practices in order to continue farming in a very sustainable way to provide for the growing population in the future.
Wow, that's amazing. I want to more focus on Africa since we are talking, and from our firm also we have interest, but we do not have much resources and understanding. And I think that's what the problem with many US firms who want to have a very diverse portfolios geographically, but also are trying to understand. I would love to know what it needs for US firms specifically that wants to have a very diverse geographical portfolios. I mean, nowadays, a lot of US firms are focusing on Israel, Europe, Asia selectively, and they want to focus on Africa. And sometimes Africa becomes very broad. The north of Africa is completely different than South Africa and the mid or the west side also. And I would love to know from your standpoint, like, what are the things that firms like that needs to know and understand if they want to go and invest in Africa? Because there are amazing opportunities over there. Obviously, the seed stage is very different than what seed stage looks like, because there everybody's bootstrapping. Nobody's standing here with a capital that they want to give it to you because you have a product on a napkin. So it's a very different world environment. And I kind of grew up in India in the similar environment, though India has changed a lot. But I would love to know, what are your, points that you want to convince this funds, like this is a great opportunity to invest in Africa?
I think there are different ways to do it. And one of the tips that I will give is, if you don't understand, find yourself a translator.
Yeah.
And that could come in the shape of funds who understand how to actually execute on those strategies on the continent. And they can give you more of a high level approach on how to invest in Africa and what the opportunity set is across multiple sectors. Most funds that I've come in contact with and that do exist, such as Launch Africa, Lofty Inc., Flat Six Labs, Arua Capital that does growth equity investing, Unicorn Growth Capital,
yeah,
Oduvia Capital out of South Africa. These guys actually understand what it means to invest on the continent. And so for folks who are interested in understanding, I think one very quick way to do it is to talk to some of these fund managers and get their perspective of how they view investing in Africa. What are the risk measures they use? What are some of the criteria from an investment approach that they use? And how do they view the opportunity set as it relates to sort of the broader global economy? One thing that sometimes puzzles me a little bit is when here in the US, we talk about impact investing and how much it affects people and planet, but we only think about the US planet and not the global planet. And I feel,
I mean, US is totally self-obsessed with US. That's where the planet ends.
And maybe rightly so, because of some of the underlying issues that the US still encounters that it really technically really shouldn't. But part of it too is that in order for the planet to move forward, every stakeholder on the planet needs to be moving in the same direction. You can't have North America and Europe advancing and then Africa and Asia or Southeast Asia specifically behind. Everybody needs to move along in order for us to get to the point that we all want to get to. And so I try to remind folks a little bit that as much as we do the work that we do here in the US, it really takes more of a collaborative effort from a global perspective to be able to move some of the needles that we're trying to move. Because you can't be having clean energy technology here while there's still pollution going on elsewhere. It's like having a room and saying that part of the room is clean, but that part of the room is dirty, but the whole house is clean though. If you catch my drift, you know, we all need to move together.
Yeah.
And maybe part of it is fixing some of the problems here to be able to go back there and help bring forward. But I think we can solve some of these problems concurrently by actually taking a look on how we can apply things that happen here and bringing it back there to help a lot of these gaps get filled so that we can all move together sort of in a synchronized fashion.
No, that's very, very well said. We all have to move together in a synchronized fashion. Now, let's come back. You talked about Launch Africa Ventures. You decided to take a limited partner hat. That's another, feather to your hat. Why did you decide to take that chance? And I would love to know your thought process, because I feel like there are a lot of people who are in your similar workspace peers, and they're much more contained with what they're doing. Rather, they can always act as a facilitator, act as that catalyst that many of these funds that doing the ground up work.
Yeah, I think it goes back to how I answered the question previously. I was curious to hear from the experts, but not only just ask the question, but actually show commitment to also learning through this process as well. Sort of playing that strategic LP role for me was just sharing with them my thought process on where I think Africa is. If you look back in the last 3-4 years, and even more so even now, you can tell and see that there's a lot more affinity towards fintech and remittance businesses, being able to send money back home and send it back here. And this is my own personal sort of observation. I feel like those businesses have created what I call the rails to help with investing in Africa. Because now sending money to Africa isn't a 3-day, 4-day process anymore. It's a 3-second, 4-second process now.
Yeah.
And it's introduced Africa sort of into the world of global payments. It's evidenced by the acquisition that Stripe made of Paystack. It's evidenced by Flutterwave's new valuation at $3 billion. And being able to recognize that for me piqued my curiosity on what was really going on the continent. And so joining the fund and being a strategic LP, I don't really do a lot, I'll be quite honest. But when I see opportunities that make sense, I forward across. I try to get perspective on why it wouldn't work. I try to understand what the true issues on ground are that wouldn't make that solution feasible. And no one has all the answers, but everyone can actually talk to someone who knows some of the answers to be able to gather and get a conviction around what it is that you want to learn. And so my role there really is to be a student and to be able to learn. If you don't know, Launch Africa is probably one of the quickest allocators of capital to African opportunities than most funds that I've seen. In 2021, they deployed capital at a very rapid rate, but they've also raised a lot of capital. I believe the fund is roughly around, and don't quote me, $25 million. And they're very close to doing a final close by either end of April or May. And to see that sort of momentum behind these guys doing that type of work is very encouraging. And I would love to be part of that journey, which is why I joined them.
So tell me a little bit about some of the startups that you want to give a shout out that are creating amazing opportunities in Africa.
Oh, yes. I mentioned Flurry, so big shout out to Flurry, building cross-border insurance solutions for Africa. You can consider that insurance tech. One Port 365, building an all-inclusive B2B digital freight forwarding platform. You can think of that as more logistics. Grocery, which is providing low-income staple foods, subscription and delivery service. Check It, which is blockchain-powered anti-counterfeit solution for the food and drug supply chain. TSAS. TSAS is an edtech company that delivers pre-K and K-6 curriculum-aligned educational content to underserved communities through web and mobile applications in both English and local indigenous African languages. Farms to You, centralized platform for smallhold farmers to farm better using data. Igugu Global, Africa's green finance deal room for sustainable infrastructure projects. Shecluded, a women-focused digital financial solution. TerraWork, a one-stop online freelance marketplace. CredPal, a consumer credit and credit card provider for Africa. And lastly, AR Initiative, a sustainability marketing and consulting firm that helps design sustainable and impact reports for mission-aligned companies. More importantly, a special shout out to the funds that I mentioned: Launch Africa, a Pan-African seed to pre-seed A fund investing platform that is tech-enabled and invests in B2B and B2B2C early stage companies. 535 Ventures, a Pan-African seed fund investing in B2B and B2B2C female-focused tech-enabled startups. Arua Capital, focused on growth equity and gender lens funding. Oduvia Capital, a true climate-oriented platform in Africa. Unicorn Growth Capital by Barbara Yayi, who's based out of here, but doing tremendous work investing in Pan-African companies on the growth equity stage as well. Input Output Fund, my first syndicate that I used to be able to get introduced into the African ecosystem. DFS Lab, Atika Venture, and syndicates like Sufficient Capital, Glasswall Syndicate, and Gangels as well. So those are a few names of entities, companies, funds, syndicates that I have associated myself with and that I know are redefining what investments in Africa looks like.
I'm coming, to my last question, and this is more your analyzing and thinking process behavior, because, you are investing in some unpredictable big ideas and you're seeing things very differently, analyzing market that others maybe find it non-sexy to invest in, or others may find it too risky, or others may find it not something very exciting. But, this is almost like a lifestyle of yours. I would love to know, what are the learning habits you have acquired and how do you analyze various thinking models?
I feel like that question is very specific, and I want to be able to answer it where folks can extract something out of it. And so whatever I say is really coming from my own personal perspective. But being curious is such a big skill set to have. Because if you're not really curious about something, you're not really going to do the work or diligence that it requires to really learn about it. And that is one thing that I've continued to reinvent myself on, is to stay curious and to learn. And quite frankly, has served me quite well. because somebody sent me an article doesn't mean that I can't respond back to them with my viewpoints to have an engaging dialogue. And sometimes a lot of people try to say, oh, I don't have time to read or to do that. But I think being able to expand your knowledge base, be able to ask some very, quite frankly, silly questions is a very good way for you to learn, but also a very good way for you to expand your knowledge base as well. I've learned a tremendous amount of information from my old colleagues at Imprint and my new colleagues at Capricorn. And I'm still constantly learning. Even though I have this role that I have now, I still view myself as a day one student. I want to know. I want to know what's happening. And I want someone to either point me in the right direction on how to learn about it, or I want someone to be able to spend the time to teach me about it as well. But I'm not going to sit down and assume that because I saw something and it's not relevant to me, that I don't really need to take a look at it. Sometimes it's just sitting back and taking 5 minutes to digest the information. And oftentimes I find out it does manifest itself in other ways in the future. And then you think back, man, I wish I'd read that email a little more in depth because I would have been able to answer that question right now. And so finding time to just continue working on yourself is a very key aspect that I want to share with folks listening to this to continue to do, because that's the only way to grow, and that's the only way to keep learning, and that's the only way to actually add value in whatever room or seat you have.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so profound. I totally agree with you. And it brings such great perspective and knowledge, and also keeping yourself hungry to learn more, being curious. And at a certain point, you feel very stale. You're like, oh, I know it all. But there's so much things are happening, and market and industry is changing all the time. I'm so lucky to have you on this podcast. And thank you for your time. And we are super excited.
Thank you for having me.
We are super excited to see what you're going to do next. So thank you for coming to SheVC.